Okay, objective number 4. Students will define conscience and explain how conscience differs from feeling guilty and give an example. First of all, the Catechism definition of conscience is found in Catechism number 1778, and it reads this: Conscience is a judgment of reason, whereby the human person recognizes the moral quality of a concrete act that he is going to perform, is in the process of performing, or has already completed. All right, so in other words, the basic components of the definition of morality from the Catechism, the definition of conscience from the Catechism, is that conscience is a judgment of reason. It's an act of logic. It's an act of the mind. All right, so one of the most important things to remember when you're talking about conscience is that conscience is not a feeling. All right, it's a judgment of reason. It's an act of the mind. We decide whether something is good or evil in our mind, not based on how we feel about something. So it's an act of reason, that recognizes the moral quality of a concrete act. So our mind thinks logically about the moral quality of a concrete act. In other words, does this concrete act bring harm into the world or bring goodness into the world? So it's the moral quality of a concrete act that a person is going to perform, is in the process of performing, or has already performed. So the basic definition of conscience is that it's an act of reason about the moral quality of a concrete act that one is going to perform, is in the process of performing, or has already performed. That's the definition of conscience. Conscience differs from feeling guilty because conscience is not based on how we feel about a particular moral act, but rather it's a judgment about the moral quality of the act. So our conscience is an evaluation of the possible harm of a particular act. It's an objective evaluation rather than a subjective feeling about a particular moral act. I'm just going to continue to go on here because the next one's about conscience too. Students will articulate the dual importance of forming and following one's conscience. Since following your conscience, since conscience is an act of reason about the moral quality of a concrete act, it would be important to form your conscience in logic before you could act on your conscience. We must always follow our conscience in everything that we do, but it takes time, education, research, and thought and guidance in order to form our conscience correctly. You know, because sometimes we might look at a particular act and think, oh, that doesn't cause harm, it won't hurt anybody. But actually the only reason that we think that is because we are unaware of the harm that we might be causing or the hurt that might come from that. So we do a particular act and then it causes harm. We're like, oh my gosh, I didn't mean for that to happen. You know, I didn't expect that to happen. Well, we didn't expect that to happen because we had not formed our conscience, because we hadn't thought about all of the consequences. We hadn't learned all the possible consequences of our act. So our conscience was in error. We thought something was okay that was not okay because we had not formed our conscience correctly. Or, you know, we hadn't formed it in church teaching. We hadn't formed it in love. We hadn't formed it in the advice of other people, and all those kinds of things that we need in order to form our conscience correctly.